I'll be right there in Matthew 26 in just a second. But I just want to give you a little introduction if I could. It's an interesting thing as a pastor that we see numbers of people and they get saved, they start living for God, and then they falter. And they start living for God again and they falter. And they really go through some real trials and some real struggles. Sometimes they're unable to break a habit. It just keeps controlling them. Sometimes they have a real difficult time in cleaning up their act because of the lifestyle they lived previously. Sometimes they're unable to trust in God and His Word. They have a hard time in surrendering it all to Him. They have a hard time in taking the time of spending and studying the Word and prayer and growing in their faith. And they're unable to win the battle quite often because of the lust of their flesh. And because of these things, we see good people that love God, who we love, and they falter and they fail. Sometimes some of these people, they quit on God, their family, responsibility. They don't allow themselves to have Christ being their first love. That's a real problem, isn't it? And then sometimes they sort of just play out their faith. They don't give it a chance to become real or genuine inside of their life. And then their failures, their falls, they repeat it and they repeat it. And they walk around and they think in their mind, I'm just a failure. Have you ever felt that way, by the way? Have you ever felt that, golly, it seemed like I take one step forward, two steps backwards, and here I am again? I said, I'm just a failure. And that breaks your heart. Well, the title of my message this morning is Grace Says Get Up and Try Again. Amen? It's time to get up and to go on for God. Jesus said to the woman who was taken in adultery, he picked up the stone and he said, ye who are without sin, cast the first stone. Of course, nobody could because we're all there. We're all sinners. Amen? Just that simple. Who of us hasn't failed? Who of us haven't lost strength at times or even our faith at times? How many of us haven't gotten off track or fallen short or just chose out to sin? I mean, we're all the same people. We're human. Even though we've been saved, we have the Spirit of God living in us, we who have been saved, still we're human. And I believe God understands these things. Times we've tried to serve God, tried to be a good husband, tried to be a good wife, to live godly, to surrender. And sometimes we just step back and say, you know, I am really gifted in the area of failure. You ever felt that way? I have in my life. I really have. And so all I'm saying is, I really believe that everybody, they fail and they fall in life. And I believe the Bible proves that out, by the way. Abraham had a problem sometimes when he'd get in, between the rock and hard spot, he'd lie. Isn't that what he did? He did that on several occasions. And then also Moses had a problem with anger. You know, he killed the Egyptian. He smote the rock. And then you had David and Samson. They had a problem with the lust of their flesh. They were always looking at the women. And then you had Jacob. If he could get some, he's kind of scheming. You know what I mean? He was a schemer. And then you had Thomas. Thomas was the doubter. He'd doubt until he would see. He didn't take God at His word. He just said, I won't believe until I see it. And then you had John Mark. John Mark was the quitter. He was in the ministry and then he quit. He went back and he quit. And then, of course, you had all the disciples. Every one of them at the cross, they all fled. We always blame Peter, but they all fled. An amazing thing to me is that when you look at the end of the story, though, every one of those men got back up and God greatly used them and blessed them. And so the question comes, how in the world did they do that? Well, it states in Proverbs 24:16, for a just man falleth 7 times and riseth up again, but the wicked shall fall into mischief. And then it states in Psalm 37:23, the steps of a good man are ordered by the Lord, and he delighteth in his way. Though he fall, he shall not be utterly cast down, for the Lord upholdeth him with his hand. Now, what picked these men back up? And I believe with all my heart what picked them back up is grace. God's grace did that. And why does God give us grace? Because God loves us. And also, we represent God. And he wants us to live for his glory. And so he injects grace into our lives. Now, some people, when grace is offered them, they don't pick it up. It's interesting. They're so ashamed of what they've done that they just would rather go on and quit and not get back in the race. And then some, they've been hurt, or what they've done has hurt others. It's caused great pain, and as a result of that, they don't accept the grace that's offered them. They're like a can of fleas. You know, you can take a can of fleas and take the lid off, and they won't jump any higher than the top of that jar that you have them in, or can. You know why? Because when you had the lid on, they keep doing it, and they keep hitting themselves, and it hurt. And so they learn they don't jump any higher than that. You can take that lid off, and they won't go out of that. Isn't that amazing? That's the way it is with some Christians. They don't want to hurt. They don't want the pain. They don't want to have to make the effort. And so they just don't go forward. And then some other people, when grace is offered them, because they belong to a legalistic church, and the church judged them, made them second-class citizens. You ever seen that before? That's a lot in Christianity, isn't it? And so they really didn't get to experience it. It wasn't extended to them. Now, somebody says, what is grace? Grace is the invasion of the favor of God even when we don't deserve it. Amen? He reaches down in grace in the midst of our messes. And we have no right to even to expect that from God. Yet he does that. And when that grace is coming into our lives, that's telling us something. That's telling us God's not done with us yet. When he offers grace, that means he's not done with us yet. And it's God's grace that encourages us, that strengthens us to get up and try again. Mary Lou Retton, the famous gymnast, when she scored her famous 10 on the vault, and that helped the girls' gymnastic team win the Olympic gold medal that year, they asked her about it. She said, well, my goal is always 10, but in order to get there, I have to work through my failures. And sometimes, as believers, we have to work through our failures. So we not be high-minded, lifted up, that we're better than somebody else, and we can fail just like anybody else. And I think God lets us fall on our face to teach us that so that we try to help each other. Amen? And so grace is wonderful. Now, grace, there are many facets of it, but just 3 areas I want to mention. First of all, there's grace for salvation, right? It's amazing to me that people have the idea that they think they can do something to wash away all their sins and get them to heaven. They join church. They go through rituals and creeds. They do all kinds of religious things. They try to keep certain commandments. And you know, it has nothing to do with that. Do you know everything necessary to save us has already been done and accomplished by one person, and that's Jesus Christ? And all I have to do is believe in who he is and what he's done for me. He's the Son of God. He died for my sins. He was buried. He rose again. If I put my faith in that gospel, at that moment, I become a child of God. And as for by grace are you saved through faith. That not of yourself, not of works, lest any man should boast. And so it's a free gift to us. We just need to accept it by faith. And so there is grace for that. I gave the illustration, but I think it's good, about how the little doggy fell in the outhouse, right? Now, the owner, he had a decision to make. Leave him in there to die, or, you know, reach something down there, a stick or something, maybe grab a hold of it, probably wouldn't. Or put a ladder down in there and go down himself and get it and bring it up. And you know, that's what God did for us. In grace, God came down here amongst mankind in all of the muck and the stuff. That's where we were. And he came where we were. And an old cross, he died to give us the bridge, the ladder. in a sense, to be able to make it to heaven one day. Thank God for grace. And then there's grace in our daily walk. Our daily walk's not about religion. It's not about rules and regulations and legislated performance. It's not about duty. I have to do this. But it's devotion. You see, grace infuses inside of us a love for Jesus Christ. And because of our intimacy with him now, since we're children of God, we begin to have the desire to please him, to follow him, to believe in his word. Amen? And that grace works inside of us. Philippians 1:6, he said, being confident of this very thing, that he which hath begun a good work in you, grace began to work in you, will perform it until the day of Jesus Christ. Then he says in Titus 2:11 and 12, for the grace of God that bringeth salvation hath appeared to all men, grace, teaching us that denying ungodliness and worldly lust, we should live soberly, righteously, godly in this present world. Grace begins to separate us from the sins of the world and begin to try to live holy for God's honor and his glory. And we do it because we love him. We do it not because somebody's forcing us, got a big stick hitting us over the head. We do it because I love him. I can't get over Calvary. I can't get over what he went through for me. How in the world could I not love him back? Amen? And so I want to please him because now I love him. And then there's grace in our failures. Grace in our failures. Grace to help us to get back up, to wipe the dust off and try to be faithful and productive for him once again. Now, Peter, he was a super saint. Peter is one of these great men of God. And I like him because he was human. He was one of the disciples for 2.5 years with Christ. He was part of the inner circle with Peter, James, and John. He had been with Christ, and he had seen Christ in his greatness. He had seen Christ perform all those miraculous healings and casting out of demons and things like that. And he had even seen the glory of God at the Mount of Transfiguration when Christ was transformed into glory. He saw all of those things, and he's a super saint. And we step back and say, wait a minute. If somebody like Peter can fall, we can fall. You know, how in the world could somebody this good, this great, how could he fall? Well, very simply, first of all, Peter began to be puffed up. He got a little prideful. In verse 30 through 33 of Matthew 26. And when they had sung a hymn, they went out into the Mount of Olives. Then saith Jesus unto them, all ye shall be offended because of me this night. For it is written, I will smite the shepherd, and the sheep of the flock shall be scattered abroad. But after I am risen again, I will go before you into Galilee. Peter answered and said unto him, though all men shall be offended because of thee, yet I will never be offended. It's not going to happen to me, God. And you see what Peter did? He began to operate in his own strength and his own flesh. And when you begin to operate in your own strength and your own flesh, that's a setup for an automatic failure. Huh? It's an automatic failure when that takes place. Peter is saying to him, listen, I don't care what anybody else does. I won't be offended for you, Lord. I'll stand up for you. You don't have to worry about that. And because he said that, then Jesus says back to him in verse 34, Jesus saith unto him, verily I say unto thee, that this night before the cock crow thou shalt deny me thrice, 3 times. Peter, you're not going to deny me 1 time. You're going to deny me 3 times. I'm going to show you how inefficient you really are in your own strength. Okay? And then secondly, Peter didn't believe what Christ had just said to him. He had unbelief in the word. Verse 35, it says this, Peter said unto him, though I should die with thee, yet will I not deny thee. Likewise also said all the disciples. They all are saying this. Peter, evidently, he thought he knew more than God. You know, Jesus is God. He just told him what's going to happen. And he said, no, that's not going to happen. I'll tell you what's going to happen. And evidently, he thought he knew more than God. And I wonder how many times we've turned our back on God's word and gone our own way. And as a result of doing that ourselves, we're reaping what we've sown. Amen? And then notice Peter, the one who said he'd die first, he couldn't even be faithful to pray with him for 1 hour. It states in verse 38 and 40, then saith he unto them, my soul exceeding sorrowful, even unto death, tarry ye here, and watch with me. That's Christ to his disciples. And he cometh unto the disciples, and findeth them asleep, and saith unto Peter, what? Could you not watch with me 1 hour? Peter, the one who said, I'll die before I'll be offended of you, Lord. And here he can't even keep his eyes open. Matter of fact, this happens 3 times with Peter. And by the way, if Christ ever needed their support in their prayers, it was that moment. Because he's in the Garden of Gethsemane, and he's fighting a battle. He's sweating his drops of blood. He's getting ready to receive the cup of the fury of Almighty God's wrath upon the old rugged cross. He needed them then, and they're asleep. I wonder if he needs us today. I wonder how many of us are asleep today. And then also Peter couldn't control his fleshly anger. He had a hot temper, verse 50 and 51. And Jesus said unto him, friend, that's to Judas when they come to betray him, wherefore art thou come? Then came they and laid hands on Jesus and took him. And behold, one of them, which most believe it's Peter, which were with Jesus, stretched out his hand and drew his sword and struck a servant of the high priest and smote off his ear. You know he aimed at his head and got his ear, right? He must have gone at him like that. And so here's Peter. He couldn't control his anger. He had this hot temper, spur of the moment. He lost control, his rage. He's upset what's going on. But just remember this, in spite of what he does here, just remember, Peter loves Christ. Verse 58, it says this here. But Peter followed him afar off into the high priest's palace and went in and sat with the servants to see the end. You know, he was one of the few, him and another one, the only ones who followed him where he was going. Peter loved Christ, and that tells me something. Even though believers, good people, love the Lord, they still fail. Regardless, they love the Lord. Some people say, well, you don't love God. They love God. But you can still fail even when you love God. And then Peter denies him 3 times, verse 69. Now Peter sat without in the palace, and a damsel came unto him, saying, thou also was with Jesus of Galilee. But he denied before them all, saying, I know not what thou sayest. Here he is. He said, I'll not deny you, Lord. I'll die first. And here he is. Verse 72 then. Again he denied with an oath. He cursed. I do not know the man. And then he says in verse 74, then began he to curse and to swear, saying, I know not the man. And immediately the cock crew. I can just imagine Peter here after he denies the Lord. He's ashamed. He's embarrassed to stand up for Christ any longer. And a lot of us, for fear of reprisal or rejection, we need to get a Tim Tebow spirit. Amen? What a guy. I don't care if he can throw the ball or not. What a guy. He's not ashamed of the gospel of Jesus Christ. And sometimes I think we need that ourselves. And isn't it amazing when we don't stand up for Christ, what that does to our heart? Verse 75, it says this here. And Peter remembered the words of Jesus, which said unto him, before the cock crow, thou shalt deny me thrice. And he went out and wept bitterly. Here's the apostle Peter. He's hurt his family. He's hurt his ministry. He's hurt his friends, his co-workers, and above all, he's hurt his Christ. And I can just imagine him thinking in his mind, in his heart, I've let down the one I love the most. I've let down the one that I believe in the most. How in the world could I have done that? So here's Peter. He's a failure. He's fallen. He's been foiled by Satan. Now he's frightened. He's fearful. Just to give you a little bit more insight, Luke 22:60 says this. And Peter said, man, I know not what thou sayest. And immediately while he yet spake, the cock crew. And the Lord turned and looked upon Peter. Now get the picture there. And Peter remembered the word of the Lord, how he had said that unto him before the cock crow, thou shalt deny me thrice. And Peter went out and wept bitterly. Can you imagine? He's following the Lord, and the Lord turns around and looks at him right in the eyes. I'm sure Peter shrunk right at that time because of his failure. Amen? And I'm sure when he went out and wept bitterly, I'm sure he said, I have blown it. I've made a mess. How in the world could I have done this? And by the way, have you ever come to a point in your life you said, man, I've blown it. You know, I want to live for God, and here I am in this mess. I've really just blown it in my life. But you see, it's right at that moment of his failure. He's fallen. That's when God begins to introduce grace. He says in Mark 16:6, and he saith unto them, this is after the resurrection, an angel, be not affrighted. Ye seek Jesus of Nazareth, which was crucified. He is risen. He is not here. Behold the place where they laid him. But go your way, tell his disciples, and in particular, Peter. You see, God begins to reach out. And he says, he goeth before you into Galilee. Why Galilee? That's where Christ met them all at the very beginning. That's where he chose them from to be his followers. But he begins to introduce this grace here. He introduces grace to this fallen believer. And how did Peter respond when that grace came his way? It states in John chapter 21, verse 3 and 4, Simon Peter saith to them, I go a-fishing. They say unto him, we also go with thee. They went forth, entered into a ship immediately, and that night they caught nothing. And by the way, you can't do anything without God, right? But when the morning was now come, Jesus stood on the shore, but the disciples knew not that it was Jesus. Then they discover it was. Verse 7, therefore that disciple whom Jesus loved, some people say that's Apostle John, I believe it was Lazarus, saith unto Peter, it is the Lord. Now when Simon Peter heard that it was the Lord, remember he had heard the angel said, tell Peter. He heard that it was the Lord. He girt his fisher's coat unto him, for he was naked, and did cast himself into the sea. He went skinny dipping immediately. He just started swimming toward the shore where Jesus was. And then it states in verse 15, so when they had dined, Jesus saith to Simon Peter, Simon, son of Jonas, lovest thou me more than these? He saith unto him, yea, Lord, thou knowest that I love thee. He saith unto him, feed my lambs. You think about that. Lord, I know I failed you. I know I've blown it. But Lord, I love you. And the Lord does that 3 times. Why does he do it 3 times? He was denied 3 times, was he not? And so the Lord is just reminding him of that. That's so important. Could God use this fallen man? And by the way, so soon, something like 50 days later at Pentecost, who's the one who stands up and speaks? It's Peter. How many came to faith? About 3,000. You see, God doesn't throw us away, people. God loves us. And he tries to restore us back so we can be more effective even the next time. And God reaches down in his grace to us when we're at our lowest point. And he whispers to our ears and to our hearts, learn the lesson. When you fall, it's hard. I want you to shake off the dust of your failure now. I want you to work through the debris that your failure has caused. Start working through that. But don't ever forget, from this moment on, I'm offering you this grace. Don't ever forget where my grace found you. 1 Corinthians 15:10, Paul said this at the beginning, but by the grace of God, I am what I am. If it were not for the grace of God, we'd be nothing, people. And so he says, I want you now to go on. I want you to go on for my glory. You see, this is not about you in your disgrace. This is about you getting back in the battle and standing up for my name and my glory. It's about me. It's not about you. You represent my name. You faltered. Okay, it's happened. I'm giving you grace. Now you get back up and you start standing for my name then. Do you know Peter never had any problem after that? Do you know that he even went to a cross and they say he was hung upside down? He didn't feel himself worthy to be crucified like his Savior. You see, all because of God's grace. And if we truly love him, we also, even though we have fallen, we will get up, we will accept his grace. If you fail of the grace of God and a root of bitterness springing up in you, trouble you and all those around you. God offers his grace, but if you fail to accept that grace, you'll just become an embittered individual person. And that's not a good life. That'll affect you, your home, your family, and all those individual people around you. God says, listen, I want you to come back and be part of this thing again. Again. That's grace. I think of grace when John Newton, who was a slave trader, John Newton was in it for money, for human trafficking. And one day in a storm, John Newton was wonderfully saved. After his salvation, he became an advocate against slavery, became a preacher of the gospel. He's the one who penned Amazing Grace, How Sweet the Sound that saved a wretch like me. That's the grace of God. Or like Mel Trotter, the local evangelist, who's an alcoholic. At his little daughter's funeral, went over and took her shoes off, went out and sold them so he could get a drink. Later was encountered by the wonderful grace of God and became a believer and evangelist. Had meetings with my wife's parents and some other preachers that we know. And you think of this wonderful grace, and now get this, that's grace for sinners. What about grace for his own? We who are saved. Do you think he's any less graceful to us as he is to people that are lost and wicked who need God? It's interesting, the church, we always hold up the people who've had such a terrible past. I've shot 38 people. I've been shot 38 times. I've done drugs all my life. And we hold them up. Huh? When in reality, that same grace that can save the worst, the chief of sinners, but also it's that same grace that works in our life. You know, when I became a believer, I was 24. I remember my past, and it was horrible. God's been good to me to forget a lot of it, put it out of my mind, but I did some horrific things. And I think about when I first got saved. I had no clue. I didn't know English, let alone read the Bible. I spoke an animal language, I think. I think that's what it was. That's why I associate with Kelly when she goes, ah! And so, so is that right, Kelly? She's an animal too. So, but I mean, my past was so bad, it was awful. When I went to Bible school down at Tennessee Temple, I just got my GED before I went down there. I didn't even know what an adverb was. That's the truth. And so anyway, I remember I had all that baggage. And boy, I want to live for God. And boy, I failed. I go back to my old flesh. And boy, then I'd want to live for God. I'd make it right. I'd cry and sorrow and repent. And then bam, I'm right back there again. Up and down and up and down. Until finally, I begin to get it. It began to make sense. I began to grow some. I began to mature some. And I began to have a little bit more victory, a little bit more victory, and a little bit more victory until I got stronger and stronger. I still fight those battles, by the way. It never ends. Huh? But our God's grace never ends. And as I look back there, I think if I were God, I would have given up on me a long time ago. But each time I failed, his grace, bam, hit me. I got back up. And I'd fail, bam, his grace was there again. And I'd get back up. I mean, every time I failed and faltered so many times, he just kept coming at me. Until I just said, I surrender. You know, God, you're greater than anything I ever have to go through. And when I begin to see that and love him more, that's when I begin to have more victory in my life. And so I just say to you today, okay, we get hit. We fail. We fall. I would be willing to say there's no person in this room who hasn't fallen sometime in their Christian walk. But I want you to know something, there's grace. And it's the grace of God that's being offered. And he says, accept it. Reach out. And I'll take you further than you've ever been. Father, we love you. Thank you for your grace. Thank you for the grace that reached down when we were in the pit and saved us one day. And then thank you for the grace that as a Christian that we have to experience daily. And especially in those times when we get too big for our britches, or we begin to trust our own strength, our own flesh. May we never trust our flesh. When we begin to think we can do it without you, we haven't learned the lessons yet, that we can't do it without you. But God, each time that we faltered, you have been faithful to us. You have given us the grace that's necessary to pick us up and kick us forward. And we want to praise you and glorify your name for loving people such as us. And I just pray that all of us today, that we would have grateful hearts and we would come once again and say, God, here I am. I'm like Peter, but God, I'm reaching out to your grace again. And I ask you to pick me back up. I pray that would be the hearts of our people in Jesus' name. And everybody said,